Nature isn't just out there in some far-off exotic location. It's all around us, including right outside our doors. Hi, my name is Shannon Trimboli, and I am the host of Backyard Ecology. I invite you to join us as we ignite our curiosity and natural wonder, explore our yards and communities, and improve our local pollinator and wildlife habitat. Hi, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to thank all of my supporters on Patreon. Their monthly donations help make Backyard Ecology possible. If you would like to join them, please visit my Patreon page at www.patreon.com/backyardecology. Also, if you would like more Backyard Ecology, please check out my blog. The blog profiles common native plants, spotlights pollinators and wildlife you are likely to see around your home, and offers tips for attracting pollinators and wildlife to your yard. To make sure you don't miss out on any of the blogs, podcasts, or other Backyard Ecology news, I send a free Backyard Ecology email once a week to anyone who has subscribed to the email list. I'll have links in the show notes for the Backyard Ecology Patreon page, blog, and email list. One last thing before I introduce today's guest. If you are listening to this episode before June 12th, 2022, then don't forget that I am doing a survey asking for your feedback about the Backyard Ecology podcast. You can find all of the details, including a link to the survey, in episode 50. If you take the survey, you'll have the opportunity to enter a drawing for one of 5 copies of my newest book. But the survey closes on June 12th, so don't wait too long if you want to participate. I often get asked about what people can plant for bees. I can give good general answers to those questions because we have a good idea of what types of flowers tend to be attractive to bees in general. We can then use that information, along with personal observations made by ourselves and others, to fairly easily determine what we can plant in a given area for bees in general. But we still have a lot to learn when it comes to knowing what types of flowers certain types of bees prefer, or what we can plant for specific types of bees. This is especially true when it comes to our native bees. Ask a Bumblebee is a new community science or citizen science project that is striving to answer some of those questions specifically for bumblebees. Today we are talking with Janan El-Hefnawi. Janan is the project coordinator for Ask a Bumblebee. During our conversation, Janan and I talk about the project, the types of questions it hopes to answer, and how anyone who is interested can help out by observing bumblebees on flowers. Along the way, we also share some of our own stories and experiences. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Janan. Welcome to Backyard Ecology. Thank you for talking with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm really excited to have this conversation because I get asked a lot about what people can plant to help the bees. And since everybody loves bumblebees because they're just so cute and charismatic and furry and fuzzy and fun to watch, bumblebees are usually one of those bees that people want to learn how to help. And while I can give some general answers to those questions for bees in general, I can talk a little bit about how some of those things might affect bumblebees in particular, like the size of the flowers and stuff like that. Your Ask a Bumblebee project that you're working on really kind of wants to dig in deeper and find better answers to those questions than we already have. And that's something that personally I'm really interested in, and something that I think a lot of our listeners are going to be interested in too. So yes, I am really excited about this, and hopefully some of our listeners will want to help out too with this project, because that's the great thing about citizen science, community science projects, is that anybody can do them and can really help find these answers. But before we really get started, can you tell everyone just a little bit about how you got into and got interested in bumblebee foraging behaviors?
Right. So actually, it was kind of a funny way. I didn't have a particular interest in bumblebees or even really bees. I used to, and when I say used to, I mean just over a year ago now. I wanted to do microbiology research, and I'm just a general biology major, or I was before I graduated last month. But yeah, I wanted to do microbiology stuff for plant science because I always really liked sort of ecology and ecosystem processes and stuff like that. But I hadn't paid too much attention to the whole insect world. And then I was really just sort of struggling to find research opportunities in the microbiology world. It was a lot of sort of pre-med things, and I knew I didn't want to do that. I knew I wanted to do some nature stuff, but not exactly what. And then I just was calling around to my friends' parents and their friends and trying to find things. And somebody recommended Sam Droege, my boss at the B Lab, and I just went over and started volunteering, and they couldn't get rid of me. And I really just sort of fell in love with the whole environment there. And then Sam saw how interested I was in just, basically anything in the bee world. So he picked this really exciting big project to sort of just throw me into. And yeah, I just started making the survey without even really knowing anything about bumblebees or bees in general. I really just sort of showed up at the bee lab, and Sam just kind of helped me step by step, but really just gave me this project. And yeah, now I'm here and I am loving every second of it. I get to just walk around and look for bees for my job.
And that's always fun, the way things kind of work out sometimes. And volunteer work is always so helpful at any stage of careers, I think, whether it's just getting started, wanting to do something a little bit different, or just finishing up your career and wanting to stay active. I mean, volunteer work's always so helpful. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of just went into it not expecting too much, but the amount that I learned just in one summer volunteering there, it was incredible. I really feel like I got so much out of just being around people who are so interested in nature, and being able to work at a wildlife refuge is a big plus.
yes. And you've got some great mentors there as well. Great environment to be in.
Absolutely.
So we've said that with the Ask Bumblebee project, that it's really looking at bumblebee foraging, kind of digging into some of these deeper questions about what bumblebees use. But what do we know in general about kind of the types of flowers that bumblebees tend to use? Because we do know a little bit right now.
Right. Yeah, we definitely do have a basic understanding of some really good bumblebee plants that I expect will continue to be the top plants in the end of my survey when we get all our results. There's things like mountain mints and bee bombs and goldenrod that we know bumblebees love those plants. If you plant them, chances are you will have some bumblebees come. And we do know some basic things about just which sort of flower traits bees in general are attracted to versus birds and things. As I'm sure most of your listeners are aware, bees tend to like, yellow and white, and they generally like sort of more open flowers because they don't have that long beak to get in like the hummingbirds do. But I actually am surprised that I don't see, I'll see a lot of bees visiting, purple flowers and sort of flowers that are shapes that I wouldn't really expect would be great for a bumblebee. Like recently, I've only been seeing bumblebees on hairy vetch and purple crown vetch. And neither of those are really, they don't fit the stereotype of what you would picture a bee going to, like, that yellow dandelion. But somehow they seem to be loving them.
And I've always thought of blue and purple as also being good.
Yeah, blue is definitely good. So bees I think can't see red is my understanding. Right. So I'm a little surprised by the purples, but I guess the blue is in there. So
It's kind of the indigo going towards that further spectrum on the light
right.
spectrum.
Makes sense.
But yeah, so yeah, there's all these plants they've been documented on that we know. And we kind of, like you said, know the general traits of plants that bees like. But then it gets into the specifics and it gets a lot murkier. And with bumblebees, we know that there's lots of different species of bumblebees. I mean, we tend to say bumblebees and as if they're all one thing, but there are different species of them. So are different species attracted to different flowers? Or maybe they all go to the same types of flowers, but this species really prefers this one over that one. And how does that start to play out? And I'm guessing there isn't much that we know about that.
Yeah, there's not a ton of information about what specific bumblebee species, their different preferences. There definitely is some out there, but I would say it's kind of the same situation as the general bumblebee information, where people say these flowers are good and these ones aren't. And a lot of it's accurate and some of it's not so accurate. But it's even visible just by eye. Bumblebee species will have really different face shapes, and some of them have a really long, almost horse-like face, and then some have a much shorter face, and the ones with the longer faces will tend to like the more long tube-like flowers because they can actually manage to get in there for the pollen and nectar. But I personally have yet to really see trends myself, and I think also some of that might be because the phenology of each species is a little bit different. So it'll be really interesting to see all the results once we can look at it on paper. I definitely, when I'm doing a survey, it's super clear to me that there are bumblebees on some plants and some are totally untouched. But it's definitely a little bit harder to see these species level trends, but they definitely are present. And the more data we get, the more we will be able to figure those out.
And yeah, I mean, at this point, there's a few species that I'm like, okay, yeah, that's this species or that's that species. But a lot of times I'm just like, oh, bumblebee. And that's as far as I go with the identification. So yeah, I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, it would be fun to kind of dig in a little bit more with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one thing I really, really love about this project and bumblebees in general is just that they're so big that they're one of the few insects you can actually identify the species without even binoculars, although binoculars sometimes are helpful. But yeah, I think that it's really a great opportunity for anybody who's interested in bees. I really recommend looking up what bee species are in your state, because in most of the US, it's going to be under 10 species in your area. In Maryland, it's something like 6 or 7 that we see commonly. So yeah, it's really easy actually to just, well, I won't say there's a little learning curve because they are fast and small, but you can definitely start to just identify them out when you're walking through your backyard and stuff. And it's so fun to be able to be like, ooh, Bombus griseoculus. Like, makes me feel very smart and in tune with my environment.
Yes. I mean, it would be just like with identifying the birds that you see or the butterflies that you see. I mean, it's just bumblebees are one of those groups I didn't learn first.
Right? It's a good way
Yes.
to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just, I had a friend staying with me last weekend who is a birder. And it's crazy how you don't even see the differences until you actually look for them. And then once somebody's pointed them out and you've seen it on a couple occasions, just looks so vastly different. It really, just learning all these different things really makes your environment so much more exciting, which is really the whole point of your podcast. So I'm sure you know.
Oh, yes, exactly. And yeah, I mean, I started learning my birds a little bit in high school, but definitely more into college when I was doing wildlife biology and getting my degree there. So I look back as birds are one of the first things I really started identifying a lot of different species with. So I kind of compare with that. And I kind of ignored the bees for a very long time because they're little and they're fast. And for me, birds were easier. But now I'm like, oh no, now I want to know those bee species too.
Right. It is such a slippery slope. And I find that a lot of or I'll hear a lot of bird people, they get interested in insects because how do you support the birds? You need a healthy insect population. And then you just keep going because then you need the healthy plants, then you need your healthy soil. It never ends.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And then if you're interested in nature and science, then a lot of us, it's not just that we want to know because it's like you said, the kind of chain reaction, but then it's the, oh, that's pretty. What's that? Oh, that's cool. What's
Right.
that? And I mean, you're just out there and you start watching things and then you notice the other things around the things that you were watching to begin with. And like you said, it's a slippery slope and there's always more questions and things to explore and discover.
Right. And that's, I feel like just doing my survey, I have spent so much more time out in wild environments or really just outside than I was before. And it's crazy just being out there and looking around what you can find.
And we're talking about identifying the bees here. But with your project, identifying the bees is nice and it's helpful, but you don't have to identify them if you don't want to, if you get confused. It's not something that you have, it's like critical to the project that only bee experts or people confident in identifying bees can do. It's an extra piece of information, but if you can just say Bumblebee, that's good.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. That is such a good point, that as much as it's fun to learn how to identify things, it is some work. And yeah, we are totally happy to just have something called a bumblebee. And I think that most people could definitely learn to identify a bumblebee versus its lookalikes in like 10 minutes at most.
Yeah.
So really anybody can participate. There's no excuse.
Yes. And I know, I mean, even if you want to identify bumblebees, and I'm one of those people, I want to start learning to identify my bumblebees. If I'm participating in the project, the vast majority of my bees that I'm going to put down on the project are going to be bumblebee, because that's going to be as accurate as I am comfortable saying. I might have a really good guess on a lot of them, but it's scientific research. So I don't want to be wrong. I want to be as right as I can be and still be right, which sometimes that's going to be to species. And sometimes that's going to be, it's a bumblebee. And that's going to be it.
Yeah, that is a very good point. It is, can be so frustrating out in the field when you're like, ooh, I was almost sure that that was this one, but now it's gone and I can't be totally confident. You just got to go with Bumblebee. But yeah, I think even the best experts, or at least the best people who are like working with Sam, he knows his bees like the back of his hand, and he still has a bunch of Bumblebee because sometimes you just can't see them.
Yeah, and that should make all of us feel good if Sam and okay, wait, let's back up a second. Who is Sam? Because you and I know who Sam is, but let's make sure everybody else knows who he is.
Right, the mythical Sam. So I work at the U.S. Geological Survey Bee Inventory and Monitoring Lab, USGS BIML, and I work under Sam Droege, who he is just a really incredible scientist and person. He is one of the foremost bee experts in the country, I think is fair to say. Mm-hmm. And he has started just so many research projects like this. He is really a sort of boots on the ground kind of person, where the bee lab now is basically a nursery. He is just planting all of these native flowers to give out to the community, and just really, he just wants to save the bees, and he will do everything he can to do that. But yeah, basically he's just sort of the head of the National Bee Inventory and Monitoring Lab, and he is a bee expert.
Yes, and like you said, at least in the country, if not the world. So
he knows his stuff for sure.
Yes. And if he has Bumblebee written down, that should make everybody else feel really, really good.
Right.
About writing down Bumblebee sometimes or all the time.
Right.
And I mean, there's other questions too that this research could possibly answer. And I mean, like, one of the other questions that comes up in my mind is about how much the bumblebees use maybe the same type of flower, but over a range. Because I know with honeybees, because I'm also a beekeeper, I know with honeybees that even if they use like the same species over multiple states or even throughout a state sometimes, they may not always use it to the same degree or in the same proportion as other plants. And that has to do with what else is blooming at the same time, how much of that species there is compared to other species, changes in the soil, changes in the climate from one place to the other, just all kinds of these different things that have impact how much honeybees use it. Would bumblebees be the same? Where in Maryland, they might use it to one degree. In New York, they might use it to another degree. And where I'm at in Kentucky, they might use the same species to a different degree. But again, that's something that we don't know yet.
Yeah, those are some really great questions that it didn't even really start crossing my mind until later in the project, when you do start to see these weird trends that are kind of hard to explain sometimes. Like, for example, I was talking with Sam this morning about how neither of us have seen a single bumblebee visit white clover this spring, but in the fall, we would see them on white clover pretty often. And both times there were other desirable plants available. So we're not really sure what that is, or if it just is a seasonal trend, or we'll see when the data comes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in between different states is a super interesting question that I wouldn't really think. And I think you won't really find out from anecdotal observations because people aren't moving around enough to notice things like that. So it would be super interesting to be able to get some of that on paper.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've got a whole list of questions too that are like, ooh, let's look at this.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot of questions about how we can use the data and what are sort of the limits of it, because there are a lot of definitely anything with floral association, like we're talking about, this will be an awesome data set for. And there's so many questions like that we can ask different plant combinations or different states or different seasons and so on. But then when we get to bee population status, there's also some questions that hopefully we can use this data for, but because of how we have tried to really limit the requirements and make it so accessible, it could be challenging to use in other ways. So I was recently talking with Sam about if we can just indicate how bees are doing in different areas, because we'll have so many surveys from all over different places with different numbers of bumblebees in each place. So hopefully we can, to some level, use that. But because we have no area measurements whatsoever to try to really make things easy. So we'll just have to be limited in terms of it's every survey is 30 minutes of effort. So hopefully we could still do a little bit of population stuff, but it's definitely also been interesting for me to see, just in terms of how you want to design a research project, these trade-offs. Like, we're not asking people for photos of bumblebees because we know that that's really difficult to get and hard to ask for. But then some people aren't necessarily going to want to use our data set, because how do we know that the community scientists accurately identified bumblebees? But still, I think there are tons of great uses, and a lot of people understand these challenges and are happy to use it without complete validation of everything. But it's all just kind of been interesting to see how it plays out in the scientific community.
Yes. And then also, I mean, you kind of alluded to this, to the general public and to resource managers and stuff, because you're looking at what plants the bumblebees are using, which therefore the obvious conclusion is they like this species, let's plant more of this species, or like you said, in combination. So if we plant species A and species B together, do they use it even more than if we planted A and B separately? And I mean, just all kinds of different ways to use this and get that hands-on data that we can then apply out either in our gardens or on larger scale for resource management projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's really sort of this project's goal, is very much to get a list of plants that are good and provide that to land managers, and not just a simple list of plants, but also, combinations of plants and planting strategies and things like that. But we really want to focus on just application and being able to get the results out in a usable way, because a lot of floral association studies, they tend to do more intricate analysis than we do. And a lot of times the end result will be a diagram where you have a list of plants on one side and a list of bees on another side, and a bunch of lines between them showing the networks of what flowers bees are visiting. And those are still super useful. And I'll probably, if I turn this into a master's project, I will make one of those. But we really are just focusing on simplicity and getting it done in a usable way. So rather than coming up with this diagram that is great for really sort of further research and applications like that, we want something that we can give to a land manager or any homeowner, and they can actually do something with and interpret it very clearly.
And I mean, it's okay to have a project that just does a piece and just takes that first step. I mean, no project can do everything, and nobody should expect this project to do everything. It's one step at a time. And then as we learn more and get that basic information, then you go, ooh, what about this? And if I tweak this way, then we can go further that way. And everybody builds on everybody else's research from before. So a lot of this stuff that we're talking about could be next steps
Yeah.
for future research.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that sort of vein, we want people to take the survey and adapt it to their own purposes, because it's such a basic sort of almost skeleton that you can really build off of. We had some collaborators at Penn State who they like the survey and they can give us our data that we want while also collecting a couple other measures that make it useful for them for other purposes. So yeah, if anybody is interested in sort of building off of this project in any way, please feel free to adapt it on your own or to reach out to me. And I would be happy to talk about that.
Well, we've kind of talked big picture kind of generalities what this is. Let's talk a little bit about the project itself and start digging in case people really want to participate or are interested in some of these questions and are like, how do I do this? How do I participate? But I've got to say, I really love the name Ask a Bumblebee, because what better way is there to find the answers to these questions that we're talking about than to ask the bee itself? And of course, we can't say, hey, bee, what are you using? But we can watch them and observe them and then report that information on a large scale and then figure it out from there. So we're asking, just not with words.
Right, exactly. I'm so glad that you're following.
But yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the project and just how people can get started, who can do it, and all those basics?
Okay, yeah. So the Ask a Bumblebee project is a community science survey for bumblebee floral preference, as we sort of hinted to. We really are focusing on accessibility, and we want as many people as possible to be able to participate. I will say, before I get into it, our target range is the Northeast US, from West Virginia up to Maine, and that includes West Virginia, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, New York. So although we are targeting the Northeast US, we're totally happy to take data from the entire US and even Canada, because we are hoping to get a little bit more support and funding and be able to expand to the entire country. So any data that's submitted, even though we can't necessarily analyze it in the first batch with the Northeast data, we will save any data that's submitted permanently. And fingers crossed, we will expand in the future. So that data will be analyzed at some point. But okay, back to the project. So we really are focusing on accessibility. So it is really quite easy to participate. The basic rundown of what the project is you walk around for a half hour. There's no transects or area measurements or anything. You can pick any location you want, which is very fun. You could go to a botanical garden. Places with the most floral diversity and richness are actually the best places to survey, because the bees have the most choices to pick from. So, it's not just their last resort flower. But yeah, so you pick your location. You just walk around for 30 minutes. You can just wander wherever you see bees or flowers that you want to look at. And then you should take a picture of every single blooming flower species that you see. And this is where it's a little different from most other surveys, is that we want flowers that bees are visiting and the flowers that the bees are not visiting. So yeah, we're hoping that by including both what they're visiting and not visiting, we'll just get a really holistic picture. And it'll also help a lot with these comparisons that we were talking about before, to see sometimes they use this, but sometimes it's there and they're choosing not to.
Yeah, I really like that fact that you are taking both what they're using and what they're not, because so often we ignore what isn't being used. But that's valuable information too. And it can be very valuable in some
Right.
cases. So I love the fact that you're doing that.
Yeah, it's not something I would have really thought of if I was coming up with this completely on my own, but it makes a lot of sense. And it kind of is surprising how rare that is for these sort of really sort of simple surveys. But so when you're out on your walk, you just want to take pictures of every single flower so that we can have our expert botanist confirm the photos, just so we're 100% confident that all of our flowers are right. And then, yeah, you just want to tally any bumblebees or carpenter bees that you see visiting flowers. We include carpenter bees both because we're interested in their floral preference as well. They are some good pollinators too, but also because a lot of people think that a carpenter bee is a bumblebee, and we want to make sure people are identifying those correctly.
Since we're talking carpenter bees and we brought those up now, how do you tell the difference? What's that basic, easy way to tell the difference between carpenter bee and bumblebee?
So the fun way is that carpenter bees have a shiny hiney, which is they have a completely, well, other than the very, very top, the abdomen is really hairless and very shiny, while bumblebees, they have a fuzzy fanny. That is the alternative. So
I hadn't heard the fuzzy fanny. The shiny hiney is the one that I know.
right, the shiny hiney, that one is common knowledge. Fuzzy fanny is a little bit, I think it's up and coming. We'll see if it catches on. I'm not sure about that one. But as Denise Ellsworth, who I will have to shout out later again, but she is at OSU, and she describes the bumblebee abdomen as it looks like layers of pile carpet, which I think is pretty accurate, and I wouldn't have thought of myself. So yeah, it's just fuzzy. It still can reflect a little light, so I think you have to be a little careful with the shiny definition. But if you look at different pictures of them, you can really see that bumblebees have a completely hairy abdomen, their whole, but no matter what color it is, it could be black fuzz or yellow fuzz. But yeah, carpenter bees will always have that shiny, hairless black butt. And they also tend to be bigger. The queen bumblebees can be a similar size to carpenter bees, but workers will definitely be smaller.
Yeah, I always think of the bumblebees too as teddy bears with wings, because they're all furry and fuzzy and looking. And then, like you said, the carpenter bees, we've already said, have that shiny hiney. So that's just one of the ways that I do is like, does it look like a teddy bear with wings? It's a bumblebee.
Right. Yeah, I think that it is, you definitely sort of get the feel for it. Like I was doing a survey today and I could just see the face and I was like, they look kind of mean. I think it's a carpenter bee. I'm sure they're perfectly nice, but bumblebees do have such a nice, fluffy, sweet sort of vibe to them. They always just, your carpenter bees, I think more people are intimidated by and stuff, which the way they fly around and they are so big, I can kind of understand, but I think bumblebees are very not intimidating. And as you're saying, they're little flying teddy bears. Mm-hmm. So where are we in the survey process?
We're walking around.
Right. So you're walking around wherever you want. You're wandering wherever you see bees or flowers. And yeah, you're just taking pictures of every flower you see. And you're going to write the name of the flower on the data sheet. And this is another way that we're really trying to make it accessible to everybody. Even if you don't know your flowers, you can totally still participate. We use the Seek app by iNaturalist, or if you did use a different floral identification app already, you could totally just use that. But yeah, we recommend Seek if you don't know how to identify your flowers, because it's pretty good. You can just walk up. You don't need Wi-Fi or data or anything, so it works in the field, and you can just sort of scan a plant by showing your camera and it will give you an identification. And then if you can't get an identification to species, that's totally still okay. We are happy to, get genus, family, or even if you wanted to, say little white flower, that's okay because we have a botanist looking at everything. So really, you don't need to know floral identification or bee identification to participate. You don't really need to know anything at all. But Maybe
That
a
makes
little
it very
bit.
accessible.
Right. So yeah, we recommend using Seek, but if you know your flowers, you could totally just take pictures and identify them from your own brain. And yeah, you just walk around for 30 minutes, taking your pictures, tallying the bees. And then we have two pretty simple estimates of floral abundance and distribution, because we generally need to know how much of each flower there is and if it's just concentrated in one area or spread across your whole survey area. And then you just snap a photo of your data sheet and submit it with all of your flower photos, either through email or through our Google Drive, which I will add people to if you send me an email, and you're all done. And you can do the survey as much as you want, wherever you want, with people if you want. There's really no restrictions. So go crazy.
Which makes it great because you can do this in your yard, at a county park, at a botanical garden, on the hike that you went on when you went camping for the family vacation, anything like that. You can do it wherever. And it's, like you said, knowledge level is not a barrier here. And I think we might want to point out that the reason why you're having people take the pictures of the flowers and go ahead and have those identified by an expert just to confirm, because confirmation's always good on things like that, and not necessarily of the bees, because we don't have to take bee pictures, is because this project is really focused on the flowers that the bees are using rather than what species of bees. Now, that's something else that might be one of those extra pieces of data that's really helpful and that you can do extra work with, but it's not critical to the project. And that's one of the ways that this project really, I would say, varies from some of the other Bumblebee projects out there. Because I know the question is always going to be, okay, we've already got these other Bumblebee projects. Why do we need another one? Well, this is asking really a completely different question. And that's focusing on those flowers themselves, with the bees being secondary, or the species of bees, we should say, being the secondary piece.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to put it. I definitely think that, yeah, we are totally focused on flowers because what do you have to do to support the bees other than plant flowers? It's really all we can do for them. So, yeah, I think that that is a really nice way to summarize that.
So everybody can do it. There aren't any age restrictions. So I know a lot of kids are at home right now from school. So this would be something that even kids could help with.
Yeah,
Younger people might need a little bit more help, but older students definitely could get involved and work on this.
I really, really recommend if there's any younger people who are interested at all. I think it's a really great way to just get out there. I mean, personally, at least, this is really what got me to pay attention to my surroundings and to start to appreciate my immediate nature. So it really has changed how I sort of walk around and how I see my environment. And I think there's a lot of people who are like me a year ago and just don't really, notice any of these things, because until you start keeping an eye out, you don't see it. So get your kids out there.
Yes. And then the more you stay out there, I don't care how old you are, and start looking. I mean, that's the way I've gone down so many different rabbit holes in my career, my life, is just getting out there, looking at the stuff, and then noticing something and going, I want to learn more. That's pretty interesting. And then, of course, 3 years later, you know so much about it. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. Now, what's that over there?
Right.
And so this project, it's kind of just getting started. You had a kind of a test run last year, correct?
Yes, totally.
So this is going to be the first full season, and people can start submitting data now, correct?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so it's up, it's running, and when can they stop submitting data?
Yeah, that is a good question. So really, the project is going to be continuing for the indefinite future. So at least for this Bumblebee season, you will just stop submitting data when you stop seeing bumblebees, which in Maryland, I was able to see bees all the way through October, surprisingly. I'm sure it'll vary with each state, but yeah, just really anytime there's bumblebees out, it is a great time to do a survey, and we are happy to accept data anytime, as long as we don't really have if you're going to do a survey when the bumblebees are not out and in the middle of the winter, I guess we don't want that. But yeah, if there's bumblebees, do a survey and we will take it.
And yeah, I mean, you were talking about seeing them in October. I've seen bumblebees here in South Central Kentucky, where I'm at, early November on some of the late blooming plants. Not a lot, but I mean, there's a few bumblebees out still, especially if it's been a warmer fall. So yeah, I mean, bumblebees can be out for quite a while.
Yeah, and it's also why we have to provide resources to them for such a long season.
Yes.
Hopefully we can identify some good plants all throughout, early spring to late fall. It's a long time of bloom.
It is a very long time. And I mean, bumblebees are one of those groups that really are active they can be active for the entire season or close to it. So it's not like some of our early spring ground nesting bees that are only active as adults for a couple of weeks or so. Bumblebees have months of activity.
Yeah, they need some fuel.
Yes.
Yeah, so generally we say the best times to survey are 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. But if you see bumblebees outside of that range, still totally feel free to do a survey and submit it. We just put that time range so we don't send people out looking for bumblebees at times that we wouldn't expect to see them. But it is pretty common definitely to see them until, 5, 6 p.m. So if you get off work at 4 and you still want to do a survey, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like peak bumblebee time, I would guess. But
right.
Yeah, those kind of shoulder times, you're still going to have them. So if that's when you can do it, great.
Absolutely.
Now, midnight, probably not going to be a good bumblebee hunting time.
Right. But you know what? You'll probably find something cool anyway. Why not try it?
So what are some of the fun observations that you've made so far as you've been going through and doing this yourself?
I guess I'll start with some bumblebee things. There's so many, random things you notice, but bumblebee wise, I think one of the coolest things to me first, I just was really surprised to see how much they will pick a plant and stick to that plant. I sort of had the idea that bees would, just hop around all these different flowers all day long. And at least for bumblebees, they generally will pick one species of flower to visit for the entire day, and they will just go to different blooms of that species. And I only even noticed that because I was wondering how I should record it if I see a bumblebee go on one plant and then move to another. But then I realized I've never seen that happen. So it just was really sort of mind-blowing that they, are so focused. But I saw you had a previous podcast on planting in patches.
And with the bees, I mean, that kind of sticking on one species and staying with that species for the whole day is really pretty common among bees. And that's what makes them such good pollinators. Because if they went to a purple aster and then immediately jumped over to a mountain mint, a lot of the purple coneflower pollen's probably going to get rubbed off on the mountain mint and it's not going to do any good. But because they go purple coneflower and then they just hop from one purple coneflower to the next, that pollen's getting spread on the same species. So it's floral fidelity is one of the terms I've heard it phrased as. But that just loyalty to one flower type really is what makes bees, besides all the hairs on them, one of the things that makes bees really great pollinators.
Well, that, makes a lot of sense. And I cannot believe that I didn't think about that before. Wow. It's crazy how evolution just is everywhere, shaping everything. And then it's pretty cool too how it not only benefits the flowers, but it's easier, or people theorize that, it's easier for the bees they're just more efficient if they pick the same flower because they get their rhythm down and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Very interesting.
Oh yeah. And like you said, you don't even realize some of these things until somebody says it, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. Of course it would be like that.
Right.
That makes so
much
sense.
Would not be helpful if they just pollinate everything with crazy different mixes.
But, Yeah. And like you said, it's one of those things that's so much fun to discover yourself. I mean, it's one thing if you read it in a book, but then to figure it out yourself like you did by getting out there and watching it, that just brings it to a whole different level.
I totally agree with that. Like I learned about buzz pollination and I think it's pretty cool, but to actually get out there and see a bumblebee like bite a flower and shake the thing and, shove the pollen into its little pollen baskets. It's crazy. It's crazy how hard all these bugs are working out there. All these jobs they're doing.
Yes. And we don't even realize it or give them credit for it a lot of times.
Right.
I just thought of something that we should probably mention. While we're out there observing the bees and we're watching them go from one flower to the next, what do you do if you're doing a survey and one flies over and doesn't even land?
They are invisible to us, unfortunately. That is the most frustrating thing, especially sort of in the past couple weeks, at least in Maryland, we're sort of in this lull where a lot of the queens emerged and did their initial foraging, but now they're kind of looking for nest sites or are just not so active. So I would see so many queens just zipping around and I would have no bees on my survey, but I would actually have seen like 5 bees, just none of them were visiting flowers. So yeah, if you don't see it visit a flower, it does not count to us, unfortunately.
But that goes back to the purpose of the project too. It's looking at what flowers the bees are using. So if they're not using a flower, they're not really part of the project study.
Right,
Unless you like chase them down,
absolutely.
because eventually they're going to land.
Yeah. And I have tried that. And sometimes I see them pick a nest site, which is also fun, but again, not useful for my project.
Yes. But that goes into those other fun observations and things that we can observe and enjoy just watching them. It doesn't all have to be about the scientific data.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I also think just spending so much time so close to the bees has really made me understand that they are not going to be aggressive unless you are near a nest site for the most part, which I think some people might be a little hesitant about, going right up into a bee's face to see what it's doing. But I've even actually gone with a friend and we would just go and pet carpenter bees and they just don't care. It's like, unless they are defending their nest, the bees will be so mild and really won't bother you. People ask me a lot if I get stung because I work at a bee lab. And I'm like, people ask me if I wear a beekeeper suit. I'm like, I think you're confused about what I do because I just walk around and nobody would wear a beekeeper suit to just walk around. But the only time I've been stung by a bee was I took one day off from the bee lab and I went to volunteer on a farm and they had a box of bumblebees in a greenhouse and those bees were not happy. And one actually climbed on my face and up my nose and stung me inside my nose.
Oh,
But it kind of just tickled. It wasn't too bad. But then I really started realizing that if I can be, an inch away from bumblebees for hours every day and they never give me a problem because they're just out foraging, it's really just nest sites that we have to be worried about.
yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up because that is a concern that a lot of people have with bees, and especially if we're working with young people too, is the fear of getting stung. But like you said, if they're on the flowers, they don't have anything to defend. They're just going to fly away. Um, I had Heather Holm, who's done a lot of bee work and written a bunch of bee books and stuff like that as well, talking about wasps on the podcast several months ago when her wasp book was first coming out. And the way she described it is the flowers are the restaurant. And so if the bees are at the restaurant or the wasps are at the restaurant, they're just kind of chilling out and eating. And unless you do something stupid, like I said, grab them or something, then they've got nothing to defend. They're just going to fly away. So that's always a good thing to bring up. And I learned it too with wasps because growing up, I was pretty intimidated by wasps. I swell up pretty good if I get stung, but I'm not anaphylactic or anything. I just have a very strong swelling reaction to them. So never really liked them. And it was wading through the goldenrods to take pictures of the bees that were on the flowers. That time of the year, you got a lot of wasps on there too. And realizing that the wasps weren't going after me, that I slowly got, like you said, kind of got that, okay, the wasps aren't that bad. And I don't have to be as scared of them because they're just at the restaurant on the flowers eating. So that same sort of thing. But for me, it was wasps, and the bees. Yeah, they don't really have any problem with it either.
That is a really fun way to think about it at the restaurant. And yeah, why would you defend your restaurant?
Because it isn't even your restaurant.
Right. And then another, I think, interesting sort of bee fear thing is that there's actually no evidence of people being allergic to native bee stings. There's only evidence of people being allergic to honeybees, which I just had never even heard until Sam mentioned it one day. But yeah, there's no records of people being allergic to a sting by a native bee.
I never heard that either. Never really even thought about it. I mean, I know wasps and honeybees have different venoms, and even my sting reaction is different between wasps and honeybees. But I never really thought about it between honeybees and all of our native bees. But I mean, I've been stung by a million sweat bees that I ran around outside as a kid all the time. I still run around outside. Of course, I get stung by sweat bees, and there's no real reaction to it. Yeah, I never really thought. That's interesting,
isn't it? And there's like no, people wouldn't publish that this doesn't happen. So there's not really any way to totally confirm it. But Sam has this giant listserv of thousands and thousands of bee people, the bee monitoring listserv, if anybody knows. And he, sent out an inquiry there, and nobody had heard of anything.
Yeah.
And then one thing that he was sort of talking about, back to evolution being behind everything, is that it's generally the things with the really big hives that are really worth protecting and investing a lot in that protection that will have issues for mammals. So like maybe some ants and some wasps and honeybees with their huge colonies, they actually are worried about mammals because maybe it would be worthwhile for a bear or, another mammal to mess with them. But none of these little sort of bumblebee nests, that's not worth a bear messing with. So they would never have evolved a defense for a mammal. They're really just worried about insects.
That makes a lot of sense.
More things I never thought about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, same thing for me. But that's why I love getting to do these podcast episodes and have these conversations, because I get to talk with people who have other expertise than I do and have these conversations and figure out all these things that I hadn't thought about before that are really interesting to think about.
Right.
Well, this has been so much fun and so interesting. Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing the Ask a Bumblebee project with us. And hopefully some of our listeners will be able to participate that are in the range where you're kind of focal area. And some of the rest of us that aren't in the focal area now can go ahead and start giving you more data so that you'll have it when you can expand the project. Notice I'm saying when, not if, because I'm being very hopeful and positive here. But if people want to ask questions or learn more, because we've kind of only given like the biggest, broadest brushstroke of the project itself, can they get in touch with you?
Yes, please do reach out to me at bumblebeecount@gmail.com. Yeah, I would love to answer any questions or help people get started surveying. Please do reach out. I will be totally happy if you do.
Great. And I will have your email address in the show notes so people can just go there and get it real easily. And then you also have an Ask a Bumblebee website that has all kinds of resources on there. You've actually just did a webinar that kind of really went step by step, walked through the project for people. And that's actually where I learned about this project, was from that webinar. So we can also put your website link in the show notes as well.
Yeah, that would be great. And speaking of the website, so our website is hosted by Ohio State, even though we're not really affiliated with Ohio State in any other way. So a huge shout out to Denise Ellsworth of Ohio State Entomology for putting together that website and putting together the webinar and a previous webinar, which Sam spoke and I got to introduce my project. Denise has been really incredible. And I think the website looks pretty great. It's a lot better than I could have done on my own with my tech skills. So yeah, definitely check out that website. And thank you so much, Denise, for putting that together.
Yes, it definitely takes a village. It takes a community. And that's one of the great things about community science is that we can all contribute in different ways. So really glad to see that website going up there because you do have some great resources there. And in addition to the ones just very specifically about the project, you also have some links to resources there for identifying different bumblebees and other things like that. I've noticed when I was looking at the website, there was some resources that I also recommend for a lot of people too that are getting interested in bumblebees or bees and stuff. So yeah, I really like some of the resources you've got.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. I definitely think that some of those, if you're interested in learning about BID, it is a really great way to get started. Especially the Bumblebees of the Eastern US. That is really great. It has some great diagrams, pictures, phenology charts, a lot of really great information. But yeah, all of the ID resources I think are pretty useful if you want to get started in that.
Yeah. Like I said, you got lots of great resources. It's definitely worth people going and checking out. But thanks again for chatting with us and hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun and I am excited to listen. Have a good one. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. I really appreciate Janan taking the time to talk with us today. I think the questions that the Ask a Bumblebee project are trying to answer are fascinating and valuable questions. I can't wait to hear about the results of the project and look forward to seeing it hopefully expand. We may have to invite Janan on the podcast again to share her results once they are available. I've also always been a big fan of community science, also known as citizen science. I think it is a great tool for answering big picture questions like this that cover a large geographical area, much too large for any individual researcher to cover on their own. I also think it is a great way to empower each of us to be able to contribute to the greater understanding and knowledge of the world around us. I really want to encourage everyone who is listening to this, especially if you are in the northeastern U.S., to consider participating in the project, because the more people who contribute their observations, the better and the richer the data set will be, and thus the better answers we'll get to those questions that we all want to know of just what can we plant for bumblebees or other types of bees. Before I wrap this up, I wanted to remind you about my newest book, Attract Pollinators and Wildlife to Your Yard, 15 Free and Easy Ways. It is designed to provide you with those quick and easy wins that you can do to make your yard more pollinator and wildlife friendly. It is especially helpful for those who want to get started but are a little overwhelmed or don't want to wait for something to grow. Visit the webpage for this episode to learn more about the book and to place your order. Until next week, I encourage you to take some time to enjoy the nature in your own yard and community.